What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Alright, so now we're looking at Deuteronomy chapter 26. And we actually have some, themes for these rules, commands, regulations, whatever you want to call them. So, there's actually going to be some consistent train of thought here. Haven't had that for a couple of chapters. Anyway, I digress. Let's dive in. Deuteronomy chapter 26. Here we go. When you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you as a special possession, and you have conquered it and settled there, put some of the first produce from each crop you harvest into a basket and bring it to the designated place of worship, the place the Lord your God chooses for his name to be honored. Go to the priest in charge at that time and say to him, "With this gift I acknowledge to the Lord your God that I have entered the land he swore to our ancestors he would give us." The priest will then take the basket from your hand and set it before the altar of the Lord your God. So, put some of the first produce from each crop you harvest. I'm wondering if it's meaning like the very first crop from like the very first harvest after they get settled in. Because the stuff about, acknowledging to the Lord that you've entered the land and whatnot, that makes no sense if that were, a repeated thing. But there were some other, offerings related to the different harvests that were a regular thing. So, yeah. I assume this is different than those. But, yeah. Not much else to say there other than, once again, we kind of see the theme of, giving God the first fruits, quite literally, or first grain, or whatever, and not just, giving what's left over. So, anyway, I don't really have any other thoughts without, kind of dragging on the same points. So, I'll move along to verse 5, because similar train of thought, so maybe I'll have more thoughts to, expand upon as we move along here. So, verse 5. You must then say in the presence of the Lord your God, "My ancestor Jacob was a wandering Aramean who went to live as a foreigner in Egypt. His family arrived few in number, but in Egypt they became a large and mighty nation. When the Egyptians oppressed and humiliated us by making us their slaves, we cried out to the Lord, the God of our ancestors. He heard our cries and saw our hardship, toil, and oppression. So the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a strong hand and powerful arm, with overwhelming terror, and with miraculous signs and wonders. He brought us to this place and gave us this land flowing with milk and honey. And now, O Lord, I have brought you the first portion of the harvest you have given me from the ground. Then place the produce before the Lord your God, and bow to the ground in worship before him. Afterward you may go and celebrate because of all the good things the Lord your God has given to you and your household. Remember to include the Levites and the foreigners living among you in the celebration." Okay. Bit of a longer chunk of verses there. So, I guess in this particular, first harvest offering, God also wanted them to remember, where they came from, and I guess in a way how blessed they are to have this, crop to offer in the first place, given where they've come from. So, in a way, it's almost like, an offering and statement of thanksgiving, recognizing where God has brought them and from where God has brought them. And then placing the produce on before God, bowing in worship, and then the whole thing about including Levites and foreigners in the celebration. I mean, the Levites were included because they didn't really get their own. I don't know if it was just that they didn't get their own crops or food or what exactly, but like pretty much their primary source of food and, being able to survive, and I don't know if even make a living is quite the right phrase, but anyway, their ability to get sustenance pretty much depended upon what other people were able to bring them, because, on the not physical end of things, more so the spiritual end of things, it was stated that, God is their portion. They don't get their own land. They don't really get, their own crops and flocks, harvests, whatever, all that kind of stuff. What they got came from God, so to speak. But these offerings and some of the celebrations and whatnot were kind of a way that God brought those things to the Levites, if that makes any sense. But, yeah. Anyway, and of course, if you want a refresher on all this stuff from Egypt and God bringing them out of there, just go back and read Exodus. Also, backtracking a little bit, designated place of worship still wasn't established at this point, which is why it's worded the way that it is, and not just like, oh yeah, at this town. Okay. Don't think I really have any other thoughts there. So, on to verse 12, which is still related to harvest offerings and tithes. Every third year you must offer a special tithe of your crops. In this year of the special tithe, you must give your tithes to the Levites, foreigners, orphans, and widows, so that they will have enough to eat in your towns. Then you must declare in the presence of the Lord your God, I have taken the sacred gift from my house, and have given it to the Levites, foreigners, orphans, and widows, just as you commanded me. I have not violated or forgotten any of your commands. I have not eaten any of it while in mourning. I have not handled it while I was ceremonially unclean, and I have not offered any of it to the dead. I have obeyed the Lord my God, and have done everything you commanded me. Now look down from your holy dwelling place in heaven, and bless your people Israel and the land you swore to our ancestors to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So this was more of just helping to give the Levites and others who didn't really so much have their own way of providing for themselves, and, giving them something to get them by. Or at least to help with that. And it says every third year. You kind of assume this would be happening at the same time, though, because you'd think they'd be, unless they kind of settle in, so to speak, in the Promised Land at different times. But, they were all supposed to kind of work together to actually, conquer the Promised Land. So that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. And if that's the case, would these crops really be able to last a whole 3 years? I don't really see that being the case so much. So I don't know. Maybe they did kind of settle at different times, but I don't know. Of course, there were towns designated for the Levites within each like tribal settlement once they got settled in. So that's still, the idea still kind of holds that, okay, some of this special tithe is it really supposed to last all 3 of those years until the next one? I mean, there's some things that maybe could, like I could see some of the grains maybe lasting that long. Then again, I'm not all that familiar with the different crops and how those would be preserved, but anyway, yeah, this is just one of those things where I'll admit, I don't necessarily understand fully how this all works, but I guess it does. So, yeah. And that command was mentioned previously, but it definitely added on to it the whole part of what they're supposed to declare in God's presence as they do that. I also like part about the part about not having violated or forgotten any commands. I'm like, really? Just because you do this doesn't mean you haven't violated the others. But I think I get the point. I think it's more so the commands related to this particular act. So yeah, all of this really seems to be done partially as like a recognition of, God bringing them out of Egypt and giving them the land in the first place, which is kind of understandable. So then we get to a different little subsection here, which I feel like something to this effect comes up a lot, especially throughout Deuteronomy, but really like within a bunch of the law section of the Old Testament. Like, I couldn't tell you where all exactly, but I would bet you this has come up probably at least once or twice in Leviticus. I know it's come up once or twice before this in Deuteronomy. Might have even come up in Exodus at one point. I don't know. But, I mean, again, it gets into the repetition because this was a much more, orally passed on tradition. Printing stuff wasn't so easy. Well, printing/writing. Maybe I should say writing. But having, written down words wasn't anywhere near as common in that day and age. Literacy in general wasn't as common. So it was a lot more just like speaking things as reminders. So anyway, now that I've kind of explained, I guess, why it would be getting into another call to obey the Lord's commands after the multiple previous times that it was mentioned throughout the Bible, let's actually get into the verses here. Verse 16. Today the Lord your God has commanded you to obey all these decrees and regulations, so be careful to obey them wholeheartedly. You have declared today that the Lord is your God, and you have promised to walk in his ways, and to obey his decrees, commands, and regulations, and to do everything he tells you. The Lord has declared today that you are his people, his own special treasure, just as he promised, and that you must obey all his commands. And if you do, he will set you high above all the other nations he has made. Then you will receive praise, honor, and renown. You will be a nation that is holy to the Lord your God, just as he promised. Okay, so that almost sounds like it's wrapping up kind of some of the regulation section of things, but maybe there's some other stuff coming up that's more like situation specific. Like, I'm pretty sure the next chapter is specifically like a one-time thing that they're going to get into. Sorry, I did look ahead a little bit. I hope that doesn't ruin it for anybody. But yeah, so just kind of reaffirming that, all right, this is what God's telling you to do. If you all agree to do this stuff, then, you know, you will remain in God's graces. I mean, he has stated that you are, you know, his people. But, like, again, there's kind of that reminder of the give and take of that covenant agreement. So, yeah, guess that wraps things up for Deuteronomy chapter 26. Okay, so I think we're pretty much done with the regulation portion of Deuteronomy. Honestly, there's only like 9 or so more chapters left to go. So, yeah, putting a wrap on this soon, and then it'll be on to Joshua, the next book of the Bible. But still, we've got a few weeks left, so feel free to keep tuning in if you want to hear the end of the Moses saga, so to speak. But anyway, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell if you're on YouTube to get updates when I post new videos. Feel free to give me a follow on Rumble if you're seeing this there, or look down in the description for information on other social media pages and how to find and follow those. And of course, below the description, leave comments with any thoughts you have. So that does it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next video. But until then, stay cool, people.